So I still don't know. I feel like there's a lot about theater that I don't know, but I feel like that has served me well. Again, like I don't have these limitations of like someone having told me once that this is how you do, this is how you design a set. It's got these things, and this is what theater is. So I had to sort of redefine for myself, or find out for myself, what theater was for me as I kind of crept my way into it as a somewhat older person.
So, Mimi Lien, so nice to see you. And unlike so many other people that we've shot so far, we've never met before this day.
No, we just met today.
So, nice to know you.
Nice to know you too.
So, how did you start? What was your beginning? Tell me about your parents. How did that all happen?
Well, when you say how did you start, meaning start doing what I do now?
Just
start everything.
What's your first memory? What is your first memory?
My first memory is in the public library, and I saw another child ripping a page out of a book, and I said,
and you were outraged.
I said, "Don't do that." I believe actually that was my first English sentence. My first actual sentence was in Chinese, and I don't remember this, but my parents told me. I said, "Leave her alone." Which basically I was parroting what my parents like. Oh, just leave her alone. But I was like, "Leave me alone, and don't do that." I guess for the beginning.
Well, welcome to America. And you were born here, first generation?
I was born here, first generation, yeah. My parents came here in the mid-'60s for graduate school. They were born in mainland China and fled to Taiwan when they were about 2 or 3 years old, so 1943, 1944. Both of their fathers were working for Chiang Kai-shek, and so they were fleeing the communists and establishing the seat of the nationalist government.
Not a good time to be.
Yes. No. My mother grew up in a rural village at the top of a mountain, and my father's family was from the town at the bottom of the mountain. So they ended up growing up in Taiwan. And then they came here for graduate school. Ended up in southern Illinois, where my brother was born. My mother studied computer science, and my father studied anthropology and linguistics.
And so genetically you decided whatever you do, it wouldn't be computer science or anthropology and linguistics.
I guess so.
Yeah, I had the same thing. Both of my parents were painters. And so I decided, well, it can't be that.
Right. I mean, it wasn't so much of an active decision.
I don't think it was active in my case either, but it was just sort of,
Yeah. So they were both professors, which I think was a great, they thought it was great. They thought it was the greatest job ever. It's like, stable, well-respected, but you get to make your own schedule. And so they've always said to me my whole life that they would love it if I ended up teaching, which I haven't yet.
Still time.
Then they ended up in Connecticut, and so I was born in Connecticut.
And how did Connecticut happen?
How did Connecticut
They had
happen?
relatives, or who
No,
did
they
that?
got jobs there. So after my
interesting.
dad got his PhD, the first job that he was offered was at Central Connecticut
We're going to
State
Connecticut, yeah.
University, and they just packed up all their stuff and drove over, and yeah, so
So why do you think they came to America, of all the choices?
well, at the time, so they grew up in Taiwan, and my impression is that at the time, America was the land of milk and honey. My mom literally was like, I thought you would turn on the tap and like milk would come flowing out.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically what I perceived to be the case is that at the time it was thought of as the best thing, the best life that you could possibly have. Like, even if you did the best you could do in Taiwan,
You were never going to, yeah.
it was limited, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, unless you're Native American, we're all immigrants and
Yeah.
from immigrant families. But there was certainly that sense that the American dream, for lack of a better word, is it's a better place to have your kids, and
Yeah.
where you are not beholden to other things, and that individuals can achieve whatever they're capable of,
Yeah.
which was certainly not what was going on, whether it was, my relatives, some of which escaped and some which didn't, the Nazis. And, they were a sort of mix of Middle European, Romanian, Hungarian, and then British on the other side. But, this was a difficult set of times. And if you were one of those persecuted minorities, it was not a lot of fun. And again, we lost family from the Holocaust and so forth. And it was, it took me a long time to learn about that because my grandparents never talked about it. So their sense is this is not something you talk to children about. It was part of the past. They came to America to leave all of that behind.
Right.
And so on one level, I'm kind of sad that I didn't get to hear more about or learn more about my family. But at the same time, their sense is, we're here in the promised land, or we're here in the new thing, and we're going to work hard and make a life of it. And the sense was very hopeful that if you did work hard, you could make a life of it.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was true.
Yeah.
Who
It's
knew?
totally true.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on both sides, your grandparents came here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that was for me interesting. And it was also interesting because unlike some places in the world or some sensibilities where the sense is you're from a country and are in another country, they came here to be Americans. They didn't come here to be Romanians and Hungarians and Brits living in America. They came here to be Americans. And I thought that was very interesting because this notion of wanting to be part of this great experiment, which had to do with freedom, which had to do with democracy, which had to do with the power of the creative voice of individuals to achieve and do that. Pretty remarkable idea and largely unprecedented. And the idea that it didn't require monarchy and it didn't require this, and how you were born didn't predetermine the outcome of your life and career,
Right.
which in many other places, if you're not royalty, you're not going to become royalty.
Right.
And if you're, in the caste system as an untouchable, you're going to remain an untouchable. And this was a very different notion of saying, no, well, there's none of that. You can achieve whatever you're capable of.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why it bothers me in particular when we have these dim-witted, in my view, new immigration laws, which sort of say, come here, get your PhD, and then get the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah.
Why doesn't every PhD have a green card stapled to it?
Right.
So, you want to be part of this ongoing experiment? Come on over,
Right.
bring your family, help build it into the next generation. So
Yeah.
it's, I think disappointing is the word that we as Americans in certain key sectors don't seem to learn from what made this a great country and what it takes to keep it being a great country.
Yeah. No, exactly.
I mean, our diversity is our strength.
Exactly.
And I think that it's also challenging because you look at, my mom and dad were artists, and my dad was one of the people who invented abstract expressionism. And it's so interesting at our age thinking that someone had to invent abstract art. But, we went through many, many years, thousands of years, with representational art being the way it was done.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, just in theater, the first shows such as Oliver, where the lights were visible on stage. The idea that the set had an exposed lighting truss and all of that, that was radical because, you didn't show the lights. The lights it was just like the concept of a fourth wall and, you're not supposed to see that. And the answer is, well, why not? Let's see it versus let's work off a bare stage versus when Jules Fisher lit Hair and it was just, in my memory, it was thousands of lighting instruments.
Right.
I actually saw the London company, not the original Broadway company, and it was thousands of instruments. And Jules was nice enough to send me the light plot from it years ago, showing it was something like 65 instruments, but it sure seemed like, compared to what you saw before.
Yeah.
And it really helped lighting come alive for me and seeing his work. It was just really inspirational. You're saying, wow. And this was choreographed as if it were another character in the show. And I've always been fascinated because Jules and his associate Peggy, who I've known them for 200 years, it keeps getting better and better. And the subtlety of cueing, where another lighting designer will have 15 cues in an act, and they'll have 1,500 cues in an act. We're just constantly modulating in a way that it is not perceptible to the audience because it is so well integrated into the music and the flow of the show.
Right.
But if it's missing, you definitely notice it. And so
notice.
that to me has just been very interesting to see how individual designers' sensibilities evolve with that. But, so much of this notion of what America stood for is reflected in American musical theater, right? There really was no equivalent form to that. And if you watch British theater, it's great. And I mean that great, but it isn't the equivalent of the American musical. And in fact, when you watch British performers do an American musical, it's painful often. And because we seem to develop and encourage a type of multifunctional performer who is equally good at singing and dancing and emoting and can project to the back of the house and do all of these things, which is not so easy. I mean, this is a complex set of skills.
That's true.
Okay, now you arrived and you chastised a person in a library for tearing out a book page.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I decided that I wanted to be an architect. I don't remember.
Now that's unusual.
Is
At
it?
8 or 9 years old, I think.
I don't.
It's so interesting. You'll have to talk to Nick Pudar because he said the first thing he wanted to be was an architect. So this
Really?
is first thing architect day.
Yeah. Well, for a long time, architect. Like that's what I thought I was going to be, an architect.
So designing spaces.
Designing spaces. Yeah, I do.
Interior, exterior, or was it all the same to you? Or
At first, I think it was interior. I mean, I remember somehow getting my hands on some architectural magazines and looking at specifically ground plans of houses, of private residences, and just like poring over them and really studying them and kind of wondering how. I remember being really obsessed with houses with atriums.
I always liked that. I always liked the idea
Unusual
of it.
features,
Yeah.
right? Bringing the outside inside and having this kind of unusual thing in your house. And yeah, I think I was just interested in introducing unexpected elements into the house and how that would affect the way that people lived in those houses and how that affected their behavior, like what kind of people live in what kind of house. I used to make my mom drive me around to different neighborhoods in our town and look at, I mean, at that point I was only able to look at the exteriors, but just even looking at the
You could break
exteriors.
in. You could-
That's
how you get a reputation.
Styles, right? But I mean, I grew up in a fairly, boring town in the middle of Connecticut, so there weren't a lot of very interesting houses. But I remember like there was one sort of southwestern looking house that definitely caught my eye, I think because it was different. So yeah, I wanted to be an architect from pretty early on. And really, despite that, didn't actually engage in a lot of visual art early on. I started playing music when I was 5. I started playing piano and violin. So for most of my childhood up through high school, most of my creative output was music. And it took up quite a lot of time.
What was your instrument?
Piano and violin.
Simultaneously?
I mean...
It's not easy.
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, one to the next. Playing in the youth orchestra. That was a very vivid memory, actually. The first time, I think I was in the 3rd grade, and I played the violin in the youth orchestra. The first day, I sat down, and the conductor lifted her baton, and everyone started playing at once. And it was just...
Who knew?
It was just glorious. Like I don't think I'd ever been in the midst of so many instruments playing at the same time, and then also realizing that I was also a part of it, and it was just this glorious sound, and it was kind of amazing. I remember that moment, really vividly. So I'm like, I have this idea in the back of my head that I want to be an architect, but there's not a lot of action, sort of drawing, and I didn't really do a lot of drawing.
Were you good at it, or it was hard for you?
I don't even know. I mean, I just had this idea, but I didn't even put it to the test, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had regular art class, and, I think I was pretty good at that. But then I had a little diversion in my sophomore year, in my biology class. I really just got obsessed with the idea of genetics, and I really enjoyed... Weirdly enough, I enjoyed dissecting a lot.
Been meaning to talk to you about that. Cutting little frogs apart.
Actually, the earthworm was kind of revelatory for me. Very strange.
Who knew all that stuff was inside there?
Yeah, and it's so organized, so linear, and it's very interesting. So briefly, I got diverted into this idea of becoming a research scientist. That coincided with my college application process. So I actually applied to college as a biology major. Who knew?
I imagine this was terrifying to your parents at each stage of these transitions.
I don't really think so. I think they really liked the idea of biology. I think prior to that...
She's finally coming to her senses.
Yeah. Yeah. Something stable, something, well respected. And I remember working for a lab. I had a summer job working for a lab at the Yale biology department between my junior and senior year. And it was this lab that was, their project was developing tomatoes to be grown in space, I guess, if you're up in space for a long time, you might be susceptible to scurvy or not having fresh vegetables. So they were really trying to be able to grow tomatoes in space, but because of the limited amount of time, they were trying to jumpstart that process.
Mm-hmm.
So my job was actually to sandpaper the backs of leaves to remove the epidermis and then put those cells in agar. And it was so fascinating because the leaves that were closer to the bud had more genetic information. And so the idea was that those cells contained enough information that you could plant it in agar, and then it would immediately just sprout up and grow the fruit without having to grow the entire plant.
Interesting.
And
Did it work?
It did.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Exactly.
So brief diversion into science. I applied to school. Half of the schools I applied to were science-oriented, and half were more liberal arts.
And you notice the problem that you can't find both in one. It's hard.
Hard, yeah.
Not impossible.
Not impossible.
And did you like school?
I loved school, yeah. I think in my kindergarten, I went to a Montessori school for nursery school and kindergarten.
Learning how to put your sweater on in funny ways. And
learning French.
Yeah, exactly.
But, apparently, right, you could do whatever you wanted to do during recess. And I just wanted to do workbooks. I really just loved doing workbooks during recess. Yeah, I think I always liked school.
I always hated school.
You hated it?
Yeah, couldn't wait to get out. School for me was a distraction from the stuff I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
It's so. What schools did you apply to?
I don't know that I will remember all of the schools that I applied to, but certainly Johns Hopkins was one of the sciencey schools, Amherst College, UPenn, Brown, Yale, University of Rochester.
Good grades, I assume, based on the schools you were applying to?
I had pretty good grades, yeah.
One of those annoying Asian straight A students. Yeah, we always found you very tedious. Actually, we didn't, because I didn't have any in my school.
You didn't?
No, it was actually
What school did you go to?
Well, I went to a collection of schools. I went to a private school in New York. I went to a public school in New York, which was Hunter College Elementary School, which actually was very interesting. It was one of the first schools for progressive kids and that. And then went to Beirut, because the family moved to Beirut for a year, so I was at the American Community School there.
Right.
And then ended up at a private school called McBurney, and then out here in East Hampton for high school. And so I was in diversity, but not at the same time.
Yeah, right.
So when I was in Beirut, the kids were the kids of diplomats or oil executives or spies.
Right.
That's who was in Beirut in the Middle East at that time. And so it was interesting because, for example, now there was a noteworthy, once I got to MIT, Asian community. And now I won't say it's predominantly Asian, but if you go there, it certainly seems like it's the majority of the population, which is great. But it was interesting because when I was in school in East Hampton, I don't think there were any Asian kids at all. And I don't think they were, in my class, 3 or 4 African American kids. There were, it was interesting how these communities, not by selection, but just kind of natural selection, who sort of ended up there and how. It's interesting how that's also changed. So for example, when I was in school out here, there was a very tiny Hispanic population. It was mainly people from Costa Rica who had ended up here. And that's totally changed. So now it's a significant Hispanic community here. And I think, all for the better. I think the immigrant community is really, but it's interesting how just in my lifetime, I've seen the nature of these communities change. I go back to MIT every so often to give a talk, lecture, be part of an event. And they all seem like they're 12 years old.
Right.
That's a bit of a shock when you go back and, oh, interesting. I guess that's what I looked like when I was there. But
I know. It's funny. Yeah, I mean, my high school, I was one of 2 Asians in the entire 4-year, 1,200 students. And yeah, I think that there were, I feel like 1 or 2 African American students?
Yeah, exactly. That was sort of my view of the world as I was growing up. And it's one of the things I actually like a lot about living in LA now is it's probably as close to a template of a city of tomorrow as you're likely to see. Very diverse, very mixed. And in a way which I think is, interesting and constructive. Because on one level, I think as America was being built, the notion was you came here to be an American. And that's great, but at the same time, connecting to your heritage is a useful and important thing too. I mean, Robin is Chinese American, first generation here. And her parents spoke very little English, understood more than they spoke, and he was a businessman, an entrepreneur, a farmer. And, you could live in San Francisco not speaking English and have a very full and complete life, but no contact with all those other folks out there that didn't look like you. And some cities, Vancouver, there were others that were like that. New York City had a obviously, its Chinatown was famous as being that. But I think that that's one of the things that characterizes great cities, is that people come from all over to want to be there and be part of it. And on one level, leave their own imprint, but at the same time, it's leaving it, for lack of a better word, in kind of an celebratory and altruistic way, where the notion is we have to preserve our culture to enrich this, and so our kids understand or speak the language. And during a significant part of time, that stopped, where the idea was, and Robin was that, don't learn Chinese, you should be learning and speaking English. And so she knew enough Chinese to speak to her parents, but she was not encouraged to learn and speak Chinese. It was the opposite, it was speak English. And when we were in school, it was the same thing. When I was in school, it was the same thing, where they were encouraged to speak English and be American. That unfortunately a lot therefore lost their language skills and access to a lot of their cultural heritage as a result of that.
I mean, I definitely think that my parents were like, got here and they're like, let's assimilate. And I think my upbringing was a little bit of that, although they did take me to Chinese classes for a little while when I was growing up. But certainly the focus was on, learn your English and do well in school and all that.
What were your favorite subjects?
Geometry. Geometry and physics, I think.
So how the hell did you end up being a set designer?
There's... I don't know how. It's completely unrelated. Well, so luckily I ended up not at one of the biology-oriented schools, but I ended up getting into Yale, and, you don't turn that down. So like,
no, well,
okay.
and that's exactly why I ended up going to MIT. Because unlike you, I had a C average because I had F's and A's. If it was a subject I cared about, like art or science, I had A's. And if it was history or geography, I had F's because I often didn't show up to the classes. And so it was interesting, but it was exactly that moment. You get into Yale, you go to Yale. I got into MIT, you go to MIT. And even though there were other schools like Stevens, which was a very good school and was offering me full scholarships and housing and all of that, which MIT wasn't, incidentally. The sense was, well, if you're going to do the school thing, don't be a dummy, go to MIT.
It was, go to the place where it's going to open up your world.
And they're great schools. Now, I loved MIT and was happy to leave it after a year. So for me, I had one of those aha moments. Because again, our family didn't have money. So I had to have a job to pay for school. And I had, two sets of jobs. I had a regular job, which was working after school at one of the labs at MIT. And that was interesting. And I was doing electronics, which I liked, and things like that as a technician. And the other job was working in theater and television commercial production and things after school or on weekends, helping out with effects or things where you didn't have to be there all the time, but you could go work with the crew and be part of the production. And I had one of these revelations where, I enjoyed the people at MIT a great deal. It was a great bunch of folks. The professors were great. But I'm doing this to learn how to do engineering and to learn how to do film or production or other things. And I have to work as a professional in both of these fields to make the money to pay for how to learn how to do these fields. At which point I said, I may not be smart about this, and maybe I should just go work at the things which these jobs were, school was supposed to be preparing me to get hired in. So for me, it was, I have always really enjoyed the time at MIT. I go back regularly. In fact, I interviewed last week Bob Millard, who's now chairman of MIT and so forth, and it changed his life and rescued him from a complex childhood of being abandoned by his family and so forth. Tough story. And he found himself there and then went off to make $1 billion and, you know, be extremely successful. And these universities are great places for that, for giving you perspective, letting you meet people who can mentor you simply by existing, right? Just sort of knowing they're there or listening to them. I remember there was a great lecture hall at MIT, 26100, and I would just go hang out there and listen to lectures. And it was physics and ball lightning, or it was aerodynamics, or it was math, or it was something else. And, you know, I would just go hang out there. So you just wander into 26100, oh, another lecture, and see what it is. And so, you know, that being able to be part of that kind of community, and then should you get interested in it, well, you can learn more about it. And odds are, if there's something to do with science or engineering, there's someone at MIT who's doing it or knows about it.
Right.
And Yale the same way. You know, Yale, I think in many ways, more diverse than MIT.
Yeah, for sure.
At the same time, you can argue MIT deeper in some areas, and you know, so you, or the Caltechs, or the, you know, Caltech has always seemed to be even much more narrow than MIT.
Yeah.
And so I think that that school experience, irrespective of how long you might stay or not, I mean, for me at least, was very valuable.
Yeah. I mean, for me, being at Yale essentially opened up the possibility, and I hadn't really considered very much prior to that time, the possibility of being an artist. Although I had this idea of an architecture, but I think I mean I saw it as an art, but it was also a profession in a way, and the sort of life of art was not something that was part of my world beforehand. And like you said, you know, I was good at school and I was very focused on that. And I feel like my world up through high school was pretty limited. You know, I was in this small suburban community that, you know, there were people whose parents I knew were an hour and a half from New York, and there were people who had never been to New York. So yeah, I think it felt quite provincial, and my sphere was pretty limited. So being in college for me kind of cracked open, like it literally is like two parts of my life. Like there's before college and after college, and my life as an artist began basically at that point.
Which is probably something you wouldn't have expected before it happened, right?
No, not at all.
And was it something you craved or not at all? It was the whole idea was introduced there as a possibility.
It's not, I don't feel like it's something that I actively craved beforehand, although when I look back at my junior high school yearbook, you know, these silly things where you write a bunch of adjectives to describe yourself or something, and I had used the word, this is now embarrassing, this is very embarrassing. I had used the word artistic in my...
I wouldn't talk about that.
In my little blurb under my picture. I was like, why did I even write that? Because I know that at the time I wasn't...
Even then you knew, you just didn't know.
I wasn't really engaged in any, but that maybe there was some kind of craving. But as far as my experience goes, I feel like it was really introduced to me at that time. And then suddenly... there was this longing, or there was a realization or a recognition, maybe, of something that I really wanted.
Let's talk about the introduction. Was it via a specific teacher or a fellow student, or you walked by an object, or what? How did that happen?
I feel like it was a combination of things. So after my first semester at Yale, where I was ostensibly a biology major, I took my first biology class and did really badly.
This was a hint.
Yeah. And I didn't enjoy it. So it wasn't even that I did bad. At the end of that semester, I just knew that this was
not
like
it.
Instantly. There was no question that I was not going to continue down that path. And it wasn't only because I did badly in the class.
And do you think it was the class and the teacher, Or do you think it's just where you were, or what? How did it go from this is my future to this sucks?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I
And
don't
that's
know
not a subtle
why.
transition.
No, I mean, somehow I really enjoyed like my high school class, biology class. I really enjoyed it, and I felt like I could see a continuing, a future in that. But for some reason, maybe the college level class was a dose of reality, or somehow it was more intense. Whatever it was the activity was sort of anathema to me. And
Not a good word to describe passion.
yeah, no, it's or maybe I changed.
Yeah.
Like
Sure.
maybe it just
Well,
was a blip.
I often find there are a lot of people are sort of closet artists in a way that, because their family, their upbringing, they were perhaps artistic as a child and used to draw, but then they were encouraged to get serious and forget that stuff and do all of that. And that later in life, at one point or another, hopefully before it dies for good, because that can happen,
Yeah.
that they are exposed to something. I mean, I've often noticed that some of the great programmers that I know, not the good ones, but the great ones, and scientists and physicists who are also musicians, or are also, this combination
Yeah.
of things that the outside world would look at and say, what do these two things have to do with each other? But clearly they realize that the satisfaction they're deriving from A, that left a big void, and B is the way they found to combine that. Sometimes people put it together into a single career, but often it's, my career is a physicist, but I'm also a pianist. I'm a this, but I'm also a that. Did you feel that, do you think? Did you feel that there was something missing? Or was it more that you were just, for lack of a better word, a shiny object? There was a new direction that was pulling you towards it?
Yeah, I
Because
think
biology was a little bit of a shiny object, right?
I think, yeah, that was. But so I think that there was always something in me that was drawn to art, but I wasn't really exposed to it. I mean, aside from music, which was another thing, but I think even just the idea of a life of an artist. I mean, this might seem irrelevant, but maybe not. After my first year of college, I stayed on living in New Haven in the summer, and I got a job working in a coffee shop. And, at the coffee shop, it's like counterculture coffee shop. It was, the skater kids and the anarchists and the comparative literature students at Yale, So socially, like in a way, I think that may have been part of what contributed this is I suddenly was exposed to this social world of artists through working in the coffee shop.
And that was appealing.
That was appealing.
Because of the characters, the people, they seemed more interesting or alive or engaging, or?
Yeah, well, they were all of those things, but maybe they also had a pathos to them. Like there was beauty, but there was also
The struggling artist, yeah.
the struggling artist, but also, content of paint, poetry, paintings, things that are not only beautiful but also painful, and the combination of those things,
Often art is the expression of people. In a way, they help resolve some of those inner conflicts.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think I found that I met people who were complex in different ways than I had, than other people I had known before. And I just had a hunger for being around that and being around them and
serving them coffee.
And I mean, there was definitely a certain amount of, kind of naive romanticism on my part about the life of the artist.
It's the best kind.
Yeah. And a kind of, undergraduate, you know, admiration for that. So I know that I was susceptible to that, but for whatever reason, that was like I gravitated towards it, and I just sought it out. Like I wanted to do more of it. So at that point, I started taking all kinds of classes, drawing, photography, painting, printmaking, like pretty much, just wanted to experience it all. So I think all of those things.
And which of those particularly appealed to you, or did all of them appeal to you?
Well, photography really appealed to me a lot. I took photography class my sophomore year. And I mean, I will say that all of them did at their own time, but I remember photography being a real aha moment for me.
What type of work were you attracted to, or did you do?
I got a twin lens reflex camera.
A Rolleiflex?
A Rolleiflex,
yes.
Yep. And so that square format.
With did you have the tele-Zenar version, or which lenses did you have?
I had not the tele-Zenar.
They were sonars. There were a collection of other things. But it was interesting because
remember.
The way you saw the world through a twin lens reflex was just very different.
It was very different. Yeah, it was backwards. Like somehow, that old trick of like you should look at a drawing upside down.
But it did that to the world for you, so you were able to look at the pure composition more than the picture.
Exactly. I just got mesmerized by looking down into that screen and finding the composition through looking at the screen.
It was also interesting because twin lens reflexes, because you weren't looking through the lens, it was a very bright, vivid picture because the viewing system was optimized for the finder, not for anything else. And I know a lot of photographers. An old friend of mine, who's one of our great American photographers, Elliot Erwitt, who's one of the few photographers.
I was really into his work.
He lives right down the road here.
Oh yeah.
And Elliot is one of those. He has a book coming out which you have to see. When he was a teenager, he had a first job, and I can't remember if it was working for a museum or the city or something like this. And these negatives were lost up until about a year ago, where someone found them and called up Elliot and said, well, I found a bunch of these negatives that, have your name on it. And so they're just doing a book of them. And they're wonderful. And this is when he was like 19 years old or something like that. You realize he just had such a great eye. And I mean, not a good eye, but a great eye. And you look at these pictures one after the other, and it's just, this is a 19-year-old kid shooting this, it's fascinating. And he's one of the few photographers that's had a star career as a photojournalist and as an advertising photographer and as a fine art photographer. And it's really hard to do in a business which segments people into, oh, this is an ad guy, or this is a, photojournalist gal or something like that. So I always admired that ability to just go between it. But again, he manages to take pictures regularly, which are for anyone else the once-in-a-lifetime shot.
Right.
And so he happens to be in the place with a composed frame and with it exposed and with the action perfect and with an amusing juxtaposition of things with a great sense of humor. How do you do that? It's one thing when you say, well, I got that one shot 12 years ago. It's another thing, let's just go out and shoot some of those. And that happens. So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. I feel like a lot of the people who I really admired, Elliot Erwitt, Bruce Davidson, and Joseph Kudelka, were all
absolutely, We're
all sort of journalists and also art photographers, and kind of
and a lot of them collected around Magnum, which Elliot was president of for a while, and all of that. And I've met through him a lot of those photographers. Of course, he was inspired as a kid by Philippe Holzman, and and it just was really interesting for me because, I mean, Kudelka is an example where it's just these people are the real deal. This is not taking snapshots. They can see the world and mechanically capture it. I say mechanically because in photography there are a set of things that have to happen. You have to be there. It has to be the right moment. the light has to work.
Yeah.
You have to focus it. You have to expose it. You have to compose it. And so, the people who can consistently produce art is the wrong word, but remarkable images where it just comes together. It's quite a gift.
Yeah. So I ended up doing an internship at Magnum after my sophomore year when I first took a photography class, and
Next shiny object.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think each in its turn, I became familiar with, tried to learn the tools of it. But yeah, photography definitely, I think instantly, I felt a facility for it. I tended to take very, very low light photos. Almost everything I shot was at night and with no people generally. I would go lurking around
And it
the
must have been
streets of New Haven.
Tri-X.
Yes, I think so.
Well, and there was that look of Tri-X, especially when you push it and do other stuff, which was just...
there was a lot of pushing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's me in the darkroom trying to just coax an image out of this negative that was
rubbing the
all
thing.
clear. Yeah.
Did you ever rub it while it was processing? That helps to warm it up.
Oh yeah.
So
Totally.
It was very. That was the photochemical photography was interesting that way, because unlike a digital capture and Photoshop world, you are really in the soup, literally and figuratively, and which is probably what killed half the photographers in the world. But it was interesting, and I became interested. I shot large format, so for my own fine artwork, it was generally nudes because I liked naked women. It seemed like this was a good thing, and if you had to take a picture, you could be shooting a turnip, or you could be shooting an ocean, or you could shoot, and I said, nudes, good.
Right.
And I also loved going out into the wilderness, into places that were hard to get to, for lack of a better word, unspoiled natural beauty, where, it's just places that you could stand on a spot and perhaps for 500 years, no one stood on that same spot again looking at this. I remember there's a wonderful book, I'm remiss at remembering the photographer's name, but he did a series of studies of national parks, taking images shot from 100 years ago, and then putting identical large format cameras and lenses in exactly the same place and reproducing the shot. And one of the things which blew me away with that is how unchanged
that landscape
but literally to the extent that here's a shot, there's a boulder, there's a little rock on top of the boulder, and that little rock was there 100 years ago. And no one moved that little rock. It's been there, and people come by it and see the rock, and no one touched it. And I don't know, I just find that pretty amazing. And I thought this was, when I looked at just like some photographers do a series of old factories or other things that just, it's a way to see our world that gives you those kind of aha and insights. And photography as a medium, a different form of communication, can be very compelling that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I was always taking pictures of found spaces and architecture. Like, I would go on these walks at night in New Haven and take pictures through people's windows. And
sure, that was appreciated, yes.
I did a series of photographs of motels on the Berlin Turnpike, these kind of seedy motels. I drove there at night and
exactly.
And
tried to avoid getting arrested.
Yeah, and sort of talked my way into getting into a room or walking, the sort of slightly suspicious desk clerk.
Exactly.
But I realize now, looking back, that this whole nighttime lighting, this very particular lighting situation in a space created a drama. Like, that's what I was after. Like, these motels, this very kind of Stanley Kubrickian, horror, or there's like a very intense sense of drama when you look at a photograph of a hallway, right?
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned Kubrick, because of course he started as a photographer, and was, I think at 16, the youngest photographer. Was it Life magazine, the youngest staff photographer ever?
Oh, really?
And so he always had a very photographic vision. And I remember, it was interesting, I was traveling, I was at a hotel, which happens a lot in my life, on the road for some production or something. And I'm sort of flipping channels, looking for something to look at in the middle of the night before I go to sleep. And all of a sudden I looked at this image, and it was a battle scene, but at twilight, and the fire was just astonishing. It was alive and vivid and brilliant. And then there was another shot, and it was brilliant. And then there was another shot, and I was realizing I was seeing one of the few Kubrick films I hadn't seen, which was Full Metal Jacket. But every single composed frame was brilliant.
Right.
And it just sucked me into it just because it was so visually interesting and engaging.
Right.
And that's what some of these masters can do, is it's just they're creating a world and causing you to be engaged on a completely emotional level, which is interesting for me because having spent a lot of my life in the effects business, special visual effects, stage theater effects, I know how all of these things are done.
Right.
With a handful of exceptions, but frankly, not a meaningful handful of exceptions, right? You may not know the subtlety, but you understand this is how, if someone asked me to do that shot, I would get that shot and do it. And when you reach a stage of technical proficiency, there are very few things that surprise you because they can often delight you because it's really well done. But yeah, we know it's a Pepper's Ghost, or we know it's this, or we know it's projection on steam, or we know it's one of 500 things you can do.
Right.
And when it works, you don't see any of that. You're just captured by the emotion of the moment.
Right.
It's when it doesn't work that you notice how it was done and so forth. And I often found that in movies that I really loved, I often have to watch them 2 or 3 times till I can be sufficiently divorced from the emotion that I can be analytical about watching how it's done. Because otherwise, I like to be swept away by the story.
Right.
And that's what's appealing.
Right.
And that means your brain is in emotional mode, not analytical mode. And guessing from your background, you understand the difference between those things. And in my case, it's very different. And in fact, they very rarely happen simultaneously. You're kind of swept away, or we did this, we do this, we do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the interesting things about photography, when you get to be good at it technically, so you can, a la Minor White, pre-visualize what a scene is going to look like and make the image come out that way. On one level, you lose the serendipity of discovery by, oh, look at that, it takes you in a new direction you haven't said. At the same time, the ability to articulate a vision and capture something that looks like what you felt it like is a useful skill.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I never thought that I was very technically proficient. I mean, like, you asked me what lens I had, and I'm like, I have no idea. But I think I've always just sort of fumbled around with it until I could get it to do what I wanted it to do. And I think, to some degree was able to do that. But yeah, I think looking back that was in a way, that was maybe the seed of this, my eventual landing in the theater, because these images that I was making were very theatrical and very, filled with drama, although I wasn't necessarily thinking about,
And up until then,
theater.
you had not worked in theater.
No, I had no experience. I had not seen really any theater. I was involved in a couple of, community theater and high school productions, but in a very cursory way.
So what happened? How did it start?
Not until after college. So I continue on as an architecture student. Really, I feel like I'm going to be an architect up through my senior year of college.
Still time, by the way.
Yeah, it's true. So I take my first painting class in my senior year of college. And then basically I'm like, well, I'm probably going to go to graduate school for architecture, because that's
what you do.
That's what you do, and that's part of the journey. And I know it's a long journey.
And as a practicing architect, unless you have the ability to build an organization where you can hire licensed architects, you really have to go that route, or no one lets you play.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly. You have to pay your dues and work for someone else for many years before. So I know that it's a long road, and so I think to myself, well, let me do something for myself before I embark on this long journey. So, I've just started painting. I really like this.
Now, wait a minute. How did that happen?
What?
We were in photography. You weren't painting. Where did the
Well,
painting come from?
I took photography my sophomore year and drawing, my junior year, and I took
Working your way down the
working my
course
way
list.
up, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I haven't tried this, but macrame.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, senior year, time to take painting. So it's the spring of my senior year, and I go off to the career services office, and I find a 1-year program in Florence, Italy, to study
One of the most
painting.
beautiful cities around.
It is. It is. Although, I have to say, I studied in Glasgow, Scotland in my junior year. I had a great time. And then ultimately lived in Florence for the 1 year. And it's a beautiful city, but my feeling about it was that it's kind of a museum city.
Yeah.
And
And that's what's interesting is you look at where a bunch of the creative designers ended up in Italy.
yeah,
And
it's not in Florence.
no.
No.
And in
it's
fact,
mired in the past.
it's usually in
Milan.
ugly industrial towns like Milan. I mean,
Yeah.
Milan is not a beautiful town,
No, it's not.
but some of the most beautiful and innovative things come out of it.
Yeah.
And that always interested me because
Yeah.
you're sort of saying, okay, how does, you can understand if you grew up in Rome, where you would gain an appreciation for architecture and history and other stuff because it's
Yeah.
all around you.
Around you.
But again, where are the great designers working and so forth? And it's
Yeah.
often in these completely not, it's just like,
Yeah.
where do the great visions and movies come from here? Well, they come from LA and Hollywood, and they come, places which are free of history.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, I think that's the strength. I look at an area like, compare and contrast LA to New York, for example. And New York has an appreciation for history, has a sense of where you belong, how you fit. LA has none of that. And it's where the concept in architecture of tear downs was invented. Oh, I'm going to buy a beautiful house, tear it down, do something new.
Right.
And we're going to build a house that has nothing to do with the character of the house next to it,
Yeah.
and we don't care. And the fact that people, on one level, people criticize you, say, well, nobody understands history. The answer is, well, that may be true, but therefore they're not confined by history.
Exactly.
And so it seems that in LA, new ideas happen faster and get traction because there isn't exigent institutional resistance, which says you can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. So I've always found that I've gravitated towards these kind of, mid-sized industrial cities. I had a hankering for living in Pittsburgh at some point, because it kind of feels, or like Detroit, feels kind of like a.
You could buy Detroit.
Yeah, there's less of that history to get mired in. Although there's plenty of history in Detroit, but
I always find it sad when I drive through Detroit. You look at the rows and rows of abandoned buildings, which are beautiful buildings and beautiful history. And when you watch how a city falls apart and then seems to resist recovery for a long period of time, it's sad because you sort of say, gee, I would love to have, what a great studio that would make, or I'd love to be there.
Yeah.
And nice, you might not just live through the experience, but it's interesting to see that there's sort of a revival in that area of new companies moving in and trying things. So, I hope it works.
Yeah. No, I think it'll always come around. But my experience living in Florence was definitely that this was a city that exists to preserve history. And for that it's great. But so while I'm in Florence, so I end up going to Florence for this year after college and studying painting. But while I'm there, in my studio, faced with the blank canvas, I just realized that I was trying to convey a three-dimensional idea in 2 dimensions. I was still trying to paint spaces and really, bring to life these 3-dimensional spaces, and it just didn't quite feel right. Like, why am I fighting this medium? So halfway through the year, I start building objects and installations. I'm dragging things in that I'm finding on the street and lining the walls of my studio and like getting pallets and like literally
Chinese
building
Marcel
like
Duchamp. Yes. When you bring a urinal home, you know that it's.
So yeah, it was really my teacher there who saw what I was doing one day and said, "Have you ever thought about scenography?" He was British. Uh, and it had crossed my mind briefly while I was in college. One could audit the Ming-Cho Lee's class, graduate class in set design. I found out you could audit it as an undergrad. But I went in halfway through the year, and it was a year-long class, so they didn't want me to come in the middle of the class.
So you snuck in.
So, no, I just let it go, you know. I didn't. I let it go.
You sneak into
I
seedy
sneak
German
in.
hotels, but you wouldn't sneak into Ming-Cho
No, I
Lee's?
wouldn't dare.
He's a nice
So
man.
it had crossed my mind, but then I let it go. Then it came back, and I thought, yeah, actually, you know, I had always been a kind of voracious reader, growing up playing music, and kind of realizing that what I was most interested in architecture was this kind of drama of space and like fictional space, right? So my undergraduate thesis, I ended up designing, you could design anything you wanted. And I decided that I was going to design a cemetery. This is why I've been on many pilgrimages to cemeteries. But it ended up not being at all about the logistics of burial or anything like that. It ended up being kind of an installation for mourners. It was almost like a study for a memorial. Like, what does it mean to design a memorial? Like, how does one through a designed space or an environment experience grief or catharsis? And so I think I was really interested in these very conceptual, the conceptual side of architecture and not so much the logistical.
So you weren't as concerned about someone living there as about creating a moment and a place and time.
And something that's going to evoke an emotion, you know? So all of this makes, like, oh yeah, set design actually makes a lot of sense. So that was the beginning. But I still had no experience in the
And
theater.
how old were you now?
21.
Which is old most people who are involved in theater got involved very young.
Yeah, it is. And I wasn't, most people are
It's
involved.
these old people that get in.
In high school, right? High school, your high school drama teacher, that's like a big thing.
Yeah.
And an undergraduate theater education. Like, I didn't have any of that. So I still don't know. I feel like there's a lot about theater that I don't know, but I feel like that has served me well. Again, like, I don't have these limitations of like someone having told me once that this is how you design a set. It's got these things, and this is what theater is. So I had to sort of redefine for myself, or find out for myself, what theater was for me as I kind of crept my way into it as a somewhat older person. Yeah.
So, okay, you had a counselor who said, why don't you look at the professor, and said,
Yeah.
good idea. Then what?
So he had just left the school in London. This was already maybe March, through the academic year. So I'm reaching the end of the time. He's like, what are you going to do? And at the time, I didn't really know. I thought maybe I would pursue photography for a little bit. But he said, well, what about scenography? I can arrange for, a late interview for this MFA program in scenography at a school in London. And so, okay, I go, I interview. I have no portfolio with any theater work at all. But somehow I get into the school.
Did you show them the other work?
I showed
your
them the
photography, yeah.
I showed them, paintings, architecture, all of the other stuff. And I get into the program.
It was apparently sufficiently theatrical.
I guess so.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, this is a 3-year program. It's really expensive to live in London. The school is really expensive. I've never done this before. I don't even know what it is. So let me work for a while. Like, I don't want to, I've been in school for a long time. So I defer the admission to that program, and I moved to New York. And
why New York? The big
growing
city?
up, I had always felt like I was going to end up in New York.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
Had you come there often?
yeah, my mom's family, a lot of my mom's family was in Queens. So we went there quite a bit.
Did you go to the theater?
No.
Of course not. Right. Exactly.
No, it was not really part of my life. And I didn't really go too much to, I mean, like, we went to Manhattan occasionally. And I do, people ask me now, like, what was the first Broadway show that you saw? And I know we did, I probably saw my first Broadway show at some point in high school, but it did not make a big impression. Even now, I think, my taste is not generally, like, I don't normally go see a lot of stuff on Broadway. So.
And why? Just not your cup of tea?
I think, like I said, like, as I've been defining what theater is for myself, I think maybe my definition of theater wants to be broader, and I feel like maybe a lot of the stuff that's on Broadway is a very, kind of prescribed model of what theater is.
Which
and so,
it is, actually.
Yeah. So I've found myself gravitating towards more experimental work and performance art and stuff like that. But I appreciate, I have enjoyed working within the confines of those models too, and then figuring out how to break them. And so it's sometimes good to have those confines so that you have something to kind of push against. But yeah, so I did, spend some time in New York growing up, but somehow I don't know, I've just always known that I'm a very urban person, that I wanted to live in an urban environment, and something about, I've just always thought to myself that someday I'm going to move to New York, and once I move there, I'm probably not going to leave.
And so you moved after school.
I moved there after school, yeah.
And what did you do to eat? So you got a degree in theater.
No, I got a degree in architecture.
Oh, so interesting. So you didn't
As an
switch.
Sorry, in undergrad,
got
yeah.
it.
I mean, so painting was after undergrad. So I went through all of undergrad as an architecture major. Then I go to Italy and have this seed of set design.
Yeah.
Then I come back to New York, and I'm like, okay, let me find out what this set design thing is. And
how did you go about that?
I actually started out working in film because I didn't really, I'm like, well, I don't know anyone in the theater. I knew a couple of people in film, had been really interested in photography and loved the medium of film. So I'm like, well, maybe there's not a big difference between set design for film and theater at the time. That's what I thought. And I had sort of a way forward in film. I knew a little bit more what to do, although not much. I mean, I literally was looking in the classifieds under F for film. But I got an internship on a low budget independent feature film in the art department. Meanwhile, I got a...
Were you paid?
No. I definitely think that this kind of work you can only learn by doing, and I've had great respect for people who have not gone to graduate school. I mean, I sort of wish I hadn't gone to graduate school in a way, but because I know that you learn by doing this work. But I was impatient a little bit. Suddenly I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted all of the tools to be able to do that as quickly as possible. But yeah, I started out working in film, and then I had a job. There was a temp agency specifically for architects. So I I signed up with them, and I had this, kind of day job, working at various, landscape architect firms building models. And meanwhile, I was interning as the art department intern on this feature. And I did that for about 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And each film working on a different position. And, ended up, the last thing I did was was an internet serial of a sci-fi series, which was great fun to design. But then this was in like 1999, and the stock market crashed, and all of the funding was speculative, and it never happened. But I realized after working in film for a while that actually designing for film, I started to learn the difference between designing for film and designing for theater, and the amount of detail, the set dressing and set decorating and art direction, and most of the jobs that I was doing, they were low budget films, so we weren't building anything.
Yep.
We were dressing locations, and I realized that I want to build things, and I'm interested in volumes of spaces and perhaps more abstract spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like most of the film scripts that I was reading called for, recognizable environments, certainly detailed and designed.
New York City, turn of the century, or
somebody's apartment, or this
Yep.
restaurant, or this strip club, whatever. And I thought, well, yeah, this has been fun, but it's not really what I want. If I'm going to work in film, maybe I would want to be the DP, So then I think maybe theater would be a better way to go. And I happened to be working with a production designer who worked in both film and theater. And so I asked him if I could
who was that?
intern. His name is Michael Fagan.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him if I could sort of intern with him and hang out with him during a theater tech. So he took me along with him to a Midsummer Night's Dream that he was working on in D.C., Shakespeare Theater. And, there was like water. There was like a big pool of water on stage, and these like silver-leafed columns coming out of it. And it was, it was definitely not a realistic world. And I thought, yeah, this is a little more my speed. So then I end up deciding, because I'm impatient, I'm like, now I want to do
now
this.
Let's get on with it.
Yeah. So now I know I want to do theater, but I don't know anything about theater. So I go to graduate school at NYU. And it's great. I mean...
And NYU, because you decided you were going to be in New York, and that was the right place in New York.
Yeah, basically. Also because I realized that I had seen very little theater, and if I was going to embark on an education in the theater, I wanted to be able to be in a place where I could see as much as possible, and be in the world, because I knew that being in the classroom was only going to be so much of it. So then 3 years at NYU, and I get out, and I'm like figuring out my, how I'm going to survive doing this. I had
this eating thing rears its ugly head.
Yeah, but I had met this crazy, Russian set designer, George Sipin, who also had an architecture background and was, designing giant opera sets in Europe and at the Met. And he had this great studio in Long Island City, which really felt more like a sculpture studio, because of, designing operas in Europe at the time. It seemed like you could just build this amazing model and then just send them the model. You don't even have to draft it. So we were building these.
To a large extent, that was true.
Yeah.
Because there was an infrastructure, especially in opera, which was designed to support all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So who were some of the, just digressing a bit, who are some of the architects who really appealed to you? Who are some of the photographers that appealed to you? Who are, you know, some of the theater or film designers? I'm curious about whose work affected you in a way that caused you to think about things differently.
Well, the photographers I mentioned a little bit, you know, Kudelka and Elliot Irwin. And I mean, architect-wise, I was really interested in Carlos Scarpa. And
How about Calatrava?
yeah, he was a big,
I would have thought you'd be a
yeah.
Saarinen.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely hundreds of people that I've sort of been inspired by and been sort of pinging off of, and like, oh yeah, like that's fascinating the way that this person did that.
And sometimes it's just nice to know them or
Yeah.
get to know them,
Yeah.
or even if you didn't get to know them, to watch them work on a production.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I feel like George Seepin, who I worked with, I think he's one of the people who I learned the most from, because he just he would just figure out what he wanted to do. Like, he would not be hampered by limitation. It would basically be approaching a design problem, being like, there is a way. There will always be a way. There's always a way you can figure it out, and let's not focus on that first. Although, you know, he definitely had the mind of an engineer and the mind of an architect, and so I've always felt like I want to be as equipped as possible. Like, I want to know as much as I can about how things work, so that all of that stuff is already in there as I'm approaching it, and maybe I don't have to actively think about it, but it's already there and it's already informing.
Especially in theater, which is definitionally collaborative, right?
Yeah.
You don't do theater by yourself.
Yeah.
A few people do, but not many people do. And, you know, you have these little technical problems like a scene change.
Yeah.
And how are you actually going to do that? How are you going to make this one go away and the other one come back? And you have a given amount of fly space, and you have a given amount of wing space, and you have a given amount of things. So the reality is engineering and design, thoughtfulness,
Yeah.
professionalism to the extent that, you know, you'll go into a show, which is a heavily hung show, and, oh, we're going to hang the line sets on 4.5-inch centers, you know, or something like this. And everyone knows if you hang the line sets on 4.5 inches, they're going to be crashing into each other and colliding throughout the whole thing. But there's no other way to get that much stuff in. And then it either works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, if you happen to be the set designer, a lot of people are kind of staring at you saying, and what do you plan to do about this? And so, you know, the reality is it's not like being an artist or a painter where if you can just capture it at that moment, you're done.
Yeah.
Theater happens every day. And if it doesn't work well or doesn't work reliably, it takes people out of the mood and out of this. And so there's a lot of mechanical stuff that has to be right.
Sure. And I really enjoy that part, you know, like for me, though, the process has been first, like, get the idea right first, you know, like approach it maybe unhampered by, I try to approach a new project having a kind of fuzzy idea of all the budget, you know, what range are we in, what the physical limitations are, but trying to keep that in the background at first, and then, like, what is the right idea? And generally, I find if it's the right idea, there will be a way to figure it out.
Yeah.
And if it's not, like if I have the idea and then we go through the steps of working it out and it doesn't work, then it's probably not the right idea.
I mean, you're going to do a road show. You can't start by worrying about how do you fit it into 15 different theaters.
Yeah.
You have to start with, well, why would I want to look at it and why is it any good?
Yeah.
And then find a way to do that.
Yeah.
And realize in some places it may not work as well as in other places, and that's life.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
exactly.
you know, that's the real challenge of road companies is, oh, by the way, the set doesn't fit. Oh, by the way, there's no front lighting position. Oh, by the, you know, and
Yeah.
there's no projection position.
Right. But if you start with that, you're going to be sunk. Like, I think that, I remember working on this one production where they had the touring calendar all laid out before we even started designing it. So they're like, well, we need to get from Austin to, Vancouver overnight. So that means we're going to have to fly it. And because we're going to have to fly it, that means that our, boxes are
Have to be no bigger than this.
3 foot by 3 foot or something. And I mean, I did actually come up with an idea where it was like, okay, well, maybe the entire set is made up of modular 3 foot by 3 foot boxes. But I was a little bit frustrated because I felt like the packaging was coming before the content.
And you felt that way because it was.
It was, yeah, literally.
As it turns out.
But I feel like, if you have the strong idea and you have the right idea, okay, if it doesn't fit into this space, you need to pare it down to one element. You'll know which is the important element to pare it down to.
Well, that's what's important. It's back to what I call the point of view. It's just sort of like pick 3 things that really matter to you that you're going to hang on to. And the rest of it's all subject to negotiation. But those 3 things have got to be right.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And that's, for a lot of people, not easy to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just also in the effects business, as you watch that business and industry mature, especially in film. When it was the beginning, everyone was experimenting and no one knew how to do any of these things. So every show you were on, on Altered States, we had to learn how to do special makeup effects and do visual effects. On Little Shop of Horrors, we had to learn how to make a man-eating plant that can do that. So on each of them, I have to learn how to do a storm. I have to learn how to do this. And it has to work with the actors, and it has to work for the director, and it has to do that. But the interesting synthesis of all of that is that it's very easy to get lost. And so if you don't have a firm belief system anchoring sensibility, what matters to you, what are you willing to bend on, what are you not?
Yeah.
And in this show, like, what are the 3 things that really matter that have got to be right?
Yeah.
If you get that right, a lot of the rest of it, it won't necessarily take care of itself. And in fact, on some shows, you have to kind of beat it into submission. But other times it just falls together and everything kind of magically happens. Less often, but it happens. So, okay, we're now in school in theater. How did that go? Did you enjoy school, NYU?
For the most part, I did. I was happy to be in New York and able to see a ton of stuff.
So you saw a lot of theater.
I saw a lot of theater. I started seeing a lot of dance, which I didn't know that I would like. And I have subsequently ended up working with a lot of choreographers and designing a lot of dance pieces, and I really enjoy it. I feel like choreographers have this, there's like a kinship with architects, I feel like. They have this understanding of space that I always find almost uncanny. And, the spaces tend to be the designs end up being more abstract, a little bit more sort of in the visual art world. A little less hampered by practical things like, oh, there needs to be a door here and whatnot. So not only am I learning about theater, but also kind of dance and opera and other forms of live performance. I think one of my only frustrations with going to school at NYU was the lack of studio space. So figuring out Workspace, right, I think it's a lifelong thing. It's something that I've constantly been struggling with. It's like, what is the right workspace? So at NYU, it was kind of frustrating because we didn't have designated studio space. And, at the time, I didn't think that was going to be a big problem, but I realized over the course of those 3 years having to set up and dismantle my workspace every day.
It's kind of a pain, yeah.
Well, not only is it a pain, but it was like, it kind of disrupts the process. Like
Well, it's a different process,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so
Yeah.
it's not the same as being in an environment with something and coaxing along and watching it mature. If
Yeah.
you have to take it apart,
Yeah.
you're kind of doing a reset every day.
Yeah, exactly. So I felt a really strong desire to be, like, because I would be working on something until, really late at night, and you're in the midst
And
of
you're
it.
a night person.
I'm a night person, yeah. So I got very good at staying up all night. I mean, all through my architecture studio years, it was an all-nighter every week. And I think there's just something about that period. Like,
Sleep is overrated.
sleep is overrated, but I just couldn't quite, like, that period of time, that quiet, that bubble of concentration, for me didn't exist at any other time of day. So I would spend the night kind of working on the thing, and you go to a place where you're like, I'm not even sure if this is good, but I'm gonna follow it. I'm gonna chase that down and hang on to that thread, and I'm gonna make something. I'm a big believer in, just do something and then you respond to it. If you don't actually get it out, it's really hard to respond to. So, you make the thing, and then, like, I really want to leave it there and be able to come back a few hours later and see, is it really what I thought it was?
Sure.
Or is it
Yeah,
just
and
total
how
garbage,
often do you do something where, because you're kind of exhausted, it looks pretty good, and then you look at it the next day and say, what was I thinking?
Yeah, I mean,
that
all
happens
the
a
time.
lot.
All the time.
Then you're sort
Yeah.
of saying, okay, well,
Yeah,
this isn't going to work.
yeah. But, so yeah, that made it difficult to do that, because you'd have to take it apart. And then when you're setting it up again, it's not quite the same as it was before. You don't remember exactly how you had everything. And then maybe you've lost something along the way. But other than that, I think NYU was a very good place for me to be. Just,
You like the teachers, the environment, the other students?
yes, a couple of teachers in particular, John Conklin and Paul Steinberg were two teachers who really kind of blew my mind a little bit. And there were other teachers who I feel like I was not as connected to aesthetically, but taught me different things, taught me some, more technical things. Yeah, I mean, it's still a funny thing. I mean, I still have conflicting feelings about art school, right? Because, again, it is something that you really need to learn by doing, and maybe that is the point of it. Maybe school affords you a window of time where you're able to do without other distractions, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Learn to focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, you're out of NYU. Now it's time to actually earn a living so you can eat.
Yeah.
How did that transition happen?
So I worked for George Seepin as his assistant for about 4 years. And meanwhile, I'm taking on tiny design jobs that have $500 budgets and tiny little theaters. So
Yes, here's $500. Knock yourself out.
yeah, exactly.
Cost is no object.
Yeah.
You have $500.
So after spending 3 years in graduate school where, we have these theoretical projects where budget is is not a consideration, suddenly, you're thrust into this very limited design situation. But, so basically I'm working for George on these giant operas and casting resin models and essentially making these sculptures as his models, which was great. In a way, I'm kind of glad that I didn't work for another designer where I was drafting, I mean, there's something I love about drafting. I've always said, like, drafting is the truth, drawing in scale. There's nothing more useful than drawing in scale because you know exactly how it's going to be. But because I was doing that for my own work, I was really having to figure out how to stretch $500 and make everything fit into these tiny theaters. It was kind of great to work for George, where we were working on these giant scale operas and just
Well,
casting
and a lot
models,
of theaters are miserable spaces.
Yeah.
And you have to try to make them a little less miserable.
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting to be creating magic when you're basically in, a dungeon somewhere.
It's true. Yeah, and
And
actually,
at least I worked in a lot of them where you're saying,
Yeah.
boy, creating magic in here is going to be a real treat.
yeah,
That's why black paint was invented.
I know. Well, when my husband and I started a theater in Brooklyn 5 years ago, we were like, he was adamantly like, it's so depressing to be in a black box theater. We're not painting
It
this
is,
black.
and often they happened of necessity, because
Yeah.
if you turn the damn lights on, you'd realize that you're not somewhere you want to be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's just like I hate exhibits and spaces where it's high contrast spotlighting with black ceilings.
Yeah.
Where you go into these places and it just, it kind of sucks the
Yeah.
energy out of you
Yeah.
just walking in.
And it's kind of like pretend. I mean, I feel like people paint things black because they're saying, "Don't look at this," or "This isn't actually here." And I always feel like that kind of denial of space is just
not helpful.
It's not healthy, and it doesn't acknowledge like your actual experience of the space. So that's something. So as I started working as a designer, and part of my process was, before I start designing anything, I'm going to go to the space where it's going to be performed, and sit in there and kind of take in the space and acknowledge that space in the design. So actually there are a fair number of set designs that I've made that are completely inspired by the architecture of the theater, or like some small detail. Like I remember designing in a black box in the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, and it was their underground theaters where they did new work and whatnot. And I went there for my visit, and it was a very nondescript space, basement black box theater, but they had just had a new, they had just done some work to the power system, or they had all these new runs of conduit and pipes running up above the grid, like more than usual. There's like a whole row of shiny, silver pipes.
Yeah.
And I just was drawn to them. I was like, this is a feature. I'm sitting here and this is what I'm looking at. So that ended up being,
run with it. Yeah.
That ended up being, the bulk of the design. Funnily enough, though, I mean, this is just a pure coincidence, but that particular play was set in a housing project in Baton Rouge. And when I started looking at research images of Baton Rouge, I saw these buildings with huge pipes running across the facades, sort of just like the ones that I had seen in the theater. And I've never actually seen a facade look like that before.
Exactly.
It was some kind of serendipity. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of been a big thread through my work, is kind of acknowledging the space that the audience is actually in.
So it's not an agnostic space, but it's a personal space.
Yeah, and it's an experience space. It's not an illusion. I guess that's been a lot of what my thrust I'm constantly conflicted, actually. Though I love having landed in the theater, and I think that being a set designer is kind of exactly what I should be doing. I'm constantly being drawn back to this kind of architectural dialogue, and for a while, I was really frustrated being a theater designer, saying like, well, the way that I think about space, or the way that I've, designed space as an architect, is like this journey that you go through as you walk through a building is a series of dramatic events, actually. And when I'm designing a three-dimensional space, it's something that you're actually walking through, and the volumes and scale and everything is informing your experience as an audience member. And when you go to when you're designing in a traditional theater space, that three-dimensional thing that you've designed is over there, and you're not actually
in it.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I think it's also interesting because it seems in some ways when you're comparing theater to film, or when you're comparing architecture to theater, that the strength of one is the weakness of the other and vice versa, where in film, it's permanent. You design something, it'll be around 100 years from now. In architecture, it's permanent. So other than someone knocking it down, it will be there.
Yeah.
And in theater, it's transient. And so you're experiencing a moment, perhaps a great moment and memorable moment in your life, which you and only a handful of other people will ever experience.
Yeah.
Because it may come back in different forms, but it's gone. And that ethereal nature makes it special, the sense that you're part of something. You're watching, whether it's this remarkable actor in this remarkable set in this remarkable play do something that is transformative.
Yeah.
And that if you miss it, it's gone. So there's a sense of that, of specialness. What was your first big break? What was the moment where the path that took you to the success, which you won at a very early age a Tony Award, which is a big deal. It helps you work in the industry, which is a nice thing. Recognition of peers and other things, which often doesn't happen with people early on. People can go through an entire career as being, I mean, there are friends of mine, Doug Schmidt, for example, who's a wonderful designer and has never won a Tony Award, unless I apologize he did in the meantime, which he may have. But, and you always said, well, gee, why is that? Well, just what happens to break at the right moment. You can do a wonderful job of designing a set on a lousy show, and no one will ever see your set.
When I think about the question, when was my first big break? Perhaps it's this show that I did win the Tony for.
Which was?
Which is called Natasha, Pierre The Great Comet of 1812. However,
which is a big hit.
It is a big hit, yeah. It has been. We'll see what's
It's nicer when
now.
they're a big hit, by the way. If you have the choice between a flop and a hit, go with the hits.
But the thing is that this show started out 5 years ago in a tiny theater, 85 seats. And, I remember we had a costume designer who was initially going to work on it. And then he ended up dropping the show because he got another show, at the Guthrie or something, which seemed like a much better thing. This was a weird, electro-pop musical that was based on War and Peace that, was being produced at a tiny theater in Manhattan and didn't have any sort of future known.
And who would have guessed? Just as, let's do a show about Alexander Hamilton. That's going to be a big hit, right?
Exactly. So you never really know. So I had no idea getting involved. I didn't get involved with it because I thought it was going to be a hit. I got involved mostly because the composer is a good friend of my husband's and
said, hey.
He called me up and they wanted to do, Dave Malloy, the composer, as he was writing the piece, he is also not from a theater background. He's a composer. He went to music school. He really, is also not
biology.
Really, no biology. Okay. Jazz. But he sort of conceived of this as a whole event, including the environment. So he was when he was writing the piece, he went to this bar in Moscow and he was doing research in Russia, and was in a foreign city has this experience of wandering, of being lost, like lost in a foreign city. You don't quite know where you are. You're disoriented.
Yeah, and it's scary but intriguing at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
I had that in Prague.
Yeah, exactly. Prague is sort of the epitome of that.
Well, and when I was in Prague, it was before communism was over.
Right.
And nothing was in English.
Right.
And I said, oh, that looks familiar on a road sign.
Yeah.
And you realize because it's the word for street, So after a few miles of wandering aimlessly.
Yeah.
But it's an exhilarating and scary experience.
Yeah. Exhilarating and scary, and suddenly, like, all of your nerve endings on your body are perked up, right? Your senses are aware in a way when you're in an unfamiliar environment like that. So we decided that we wanted to create that kind of a feeling entering the space. And then also where he ended up that night was this bar where he walked in and suddenly the room was just infused with music and people were eating and drinking and having a good time. And he was like, I just want this to be the environment for the show. And so we talked about it from the very beginning as it being a very environmental, physical container for the show. And I was interested in making that because I had been feeling this kind of dearth of, designing the actual space that the audience is in, as opposed to designing the space on stage that not the actors, the audience, that the audience views from afar. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been hungry to design a space that envelops the audience as well. So yeah, so that's really why I got on board. And then weirdly, this was a big success at the tiny Ars Nova Theater, and a commercial producer picked it up, and we did a off-Broadway run. He wanted to take this supper club idea even further and really he wanted to sort of reinvent dinner theater and serve a full Russian meal. And so we were looking for a space, a non-traditional space to do this,
exactly.
Where we had to design it. Yeah, I was in charge of not only the set now, but also designing a kitchen, the dressing rooms, the lobby, and like the entire thing, basically.
Good thing you were an architect.
I guess so. We couldn't find a suitable space in New York.
It's hard.
Columns, sightline problems. We looked at nightclubs and spaces in hotels and just couldn't find anything suitable. The producer, to his credit, suddenly one day he was like, why don't we just do it in a big tent? You can get a wedding tent that's 60 by 100 feet, no columns. I found out about this vacant lot, in the meatpacking district. And so that's what we did. We built an entire theater from the ground up in about 3 weeks. And that's when I started getting all of my gray hair.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we said it's going to take 6 weeks to do it. And he said, well,
we can't afford that.
Get it done in 3. And
there's a lot of that. Because so many of these projects, which, very easy, big hit now, then was probably getting by the skin of its teeth. There was no sense it was going to be a hit.
Yeah.
At least not such that backers would say, oh, here, great, take your time, relax.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there are some shows that I worked on that you had a sense were going to be a hit because they were a hit in the London stage, West End, or something like that.
Right.
So Cats.
Right.
And John Napier's set was this environmental set where you're in a junkyard scaled such that if you were a cat, this is what the junkyard would look like. And that was quite a hoot, but no one would have let you do that in a Broadway theater if it hadn't been a big hit on the West End.
Right.
So you got permission
Right.
to do that
Right.
and wreck the theater and spend an unprecedented amount of money on set because the Schuberts knew this was going to be a hit.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't have to be a hit because they know it's going to be a hit, but it turns out it was.
Right.
And that one was nice because it sent me a check for 25 years every week. It turns out this royalty thing is actually quite nice when you have a show that runs forever and has a bunch of road companies and so forth. So it's so funny because the ability to predict which of these shows click. I'm terrible at. I mean, I thought Frankenstein would run forever. That was the sense of
Right.
everyone, because this was just a really big, interesting night in theater with,
Right.
the astonishing sets and these transitions and other things. And immodestly, the effects were okay.
Right.
And so, he said, this is going to run forever. It closes opening night because it cost so much to do. And, it opened with a newspaper strike and a collection of other, it was just a whole bunch of things. There are other shows that I worked on. First show I did on Broadway was the Sherlock Holmes thing called The Crucifer of Blood, which had, a nice run and so forth. Nobody had heard of it. But a show I did which, even though the talent behind it was enormous, Stephen Sondheim and such, was new director James Lapine that people didn't know much about, and it was Sunday in the Park with George.
Right.
And no one had any idea if there was an audience for that show, if they were going to see it, because it was just not like a normal Broadway musical, musically or performance-wise. Mandy Patinkin, Patti LuPone, and did very well. And it was a sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, because it was in a very small theater, because the sense was this needed to be a comparatively intimate experience. But then when you have a big, expensive show running in a small theater, how much money can it make versus how much it costs to run, versus, well, would you move it? No, it's a lot of money to move, So the business end of theater is a big part of the dynamic that a lot of people don't appreciate, but it drives a lot of the decisions.
Oh, yes. It's true.
Or did you notice?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mean, this Natasha Pierre was the first commercial production that I worked on, so I definitely noticed. Yeah, suddenly there were different motivating factors.
And when was it clear that it was going to be a big hit?
Well, I mean, you mean on Broadway or in general? Well, it went, it did this run in the tent.
Yep.
And it ran for quite a long time, and it was pretty successful there. So I think there was maybe a thought at that point that maybe it
could this be brought to Broadway?
Be, right. But because, in the tent, it was completely environmental. There was no sense of a proscenium relationship at all. So I think everyone was like, this is amazing, and it's definitely a hit in this form, but can it really transfer?
Well, and that's frankly what people thought about Sunday in the Park with George, is this is an interesting workshop.
Right.
But, can it be that? And the director passed that into the woods and, a series of things before and after, but this was not a surefire hit. And this was not it's clear that this will translate well to Broadway.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we did, it ran in the tent for quite a while, like over a year. And then they actually moved the tent to 45th Street, and it ran there for another 5 or 6 months. And then there was talk about moving to Broadway, and I actually drew it up for several Broadway houses, because this is not a design that you can draw once and drop it into.
You just say, here it is.
Yep.
We'll be there Thursday.
It fits like a glove into any space that it's in, and basically lines the entire space that it's in with red curtains, and like basically eliminates the boundary between the stage and the house. So I ended up drawing it up for 3 different theaters as they were considering this move. And then it didn't happen for a little while, or it didn't happen. And, I mean, I don't know the details of all the conversations that happened, but I think at some point, the ART up in Cambridge was interested in bringing it to their theater, and somehow this seemed like a good way to test out how we would do this in a proscenium theater. So that was a big change, because up until that point, the first design, I expanded it for the tent, and then the tent moved, and it basically, the same design principles were at work. And then at ART, that was the first time where we had to really rethink it, and the composition completely changed, but keeping the main kind of tenets of the design were, for me, it was about the rhythm of the piece, like the shape of the pathways was dictated by the musicality of it and how I felt like the performers wanted to move. And it also delivers the performers to the audience. So it's all about like integrating. So the stage spills out into the house. We take out a bunch of seats in the house. Stage spills out. We build up a lot of platforms in the house, and audience goes on stage, actors come into the house. So there's this kind of cross-pollination of the two spaces. And so keeping all of those things in mind, the composition totally changed, but those things were intact. And those are basically like before. These are the things that you hold on to.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if those are clear, then you know what to do. Even though it ended up looking very, very different. So I think at ART, that was when we did it there, and it worked. That was when, I think we all knew that maybe it would work on. That it was going to.
So the critical question: where do you keep your Tony Award?
Well, right now I haven't even gotten it engraved yet because I know I've been out of town.
Have a Dymo label stuck onto it too.
Yeah, it's just sitting there blank.
A Post-it note.
Yeah. So we have a piano in our living room, a very ratty old piano that we got for free. Some rehearsal studio was throwing out all their pianos, so we have this piano. My husband made a show called Three Pianos, where he and two other guys play these three pianos and they roll them around on stage, and we rehearse.
And tell us who your husband is.
His name is Alec Duffy. He's a theater director, but also performed in this show.
How did you two meet?
We met because we were both recipients of a grant given out by TCG, and it was a grant for directors and designers, which was an amazing program and doesn't exist anymore.
Sad.
It's really too bad. But for 20 years, it existed, and every 2 years, they would select 7 directors and 7 designers. And it's kind of a great thing. It's basically for your enrichment. So if you get the grant, you...
Like a MacArthur in some ways, to enable you to
Yeah.
focus on your art rather than
Yeah, exactly. But
eating.
But a little bit more specific in terms of its structure. So they say, well, so here's this amount of money so that you can live on it instead of having to work.
Grovel.
And focus.
Yes.
And for 6 months out of 2 years, you are going to develop some activities that you want to do, like maybe, but it can be anything, So if I wanted to go and learn origami from an origami master, I could go and do that for a month.
Yeah.
Or if I wanted to go, I said I wanted to take a structural engineering class because I wanted to learn more about that. Or go observe, William Kentridge is a great, I really love his work, both as a visual artist and as a puppeteer. So I wanted to go kind of observe him in his studio. So at the orientation retreat for this grant was where my husband and I met, because he was one of the directors and I was one of the designers.
Neat.
Yeah.
So what makes you happy?
Working in a leisurely way. I realized that...
You sure picked the right business for that.
I mean, I haven't been able to do it.
I was about to say, yes. It's unprecedented in the history of theater.
Or I think that this is what would make me happy. Or, the few times when I've had a full docket of projects, right? So I know, or I think I know. I tried to take a little bit of a, so it's been pretty nonstop for the past 10 years or so. I think I've designed like 14 shows a year pretty much, and it's just been back to back.
Which is the good news and the bad news.
Yeah, exactly. And I did actually think that I should take a little bit of time, especially after getting the MacArthur. I'm like, this is the moment to kind of assess and and have an opportunity to do something.
And what year did you get the MacArthur?
2015.
Was that a surprise?
Oh my God.
Out of the blue?
Biggest, I mean, like, still the biggest shock of my life. Like, I never would have thought that would happen, ever. Yeah, big surprise. So, yeah, so I thought I'm going to take a couple of months, or actually the initial idea was 6 months, to sort of clear my plate and see what might arise. And it was, that experiment didn't work out.
How's that working out for you?
Yeah, that didn't work out so well. So I know that I'm happiest when I have projects that I'm excited about, and like a full palette of different things that are kind of different projects that are informing each other in different ways. I find that when I'm working on multiple projects, they do tend to inform each other. As I'm working on one, like one idea that I'm thinking about for the one kind of informs the other. So I like having multiple things going on at one time. Of course, when you're under the, crunch time and the deadline's coming and you're sort of miserable because you feel overwhelmed and behind on everything, that's,
Well, and the
not a
fact
happy
is, the
feeling.
old saying, the show must go on, is actually pretty accurate. And there are real time pressures about, when does this have to go to the shop for a bid? And how long does it take to build it? And how long does it take to load it in?
Yeah.
And by the way, we're opening this night, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, exactly. So those are always there, but sometimes I have had brief glimpses where in between these big deadline times, sometimes when I'm at the beginning of conceiving a project and I have a few days where I can basically just, think about the project, go to the library, do research, and
Library, I've heard of those.
I love libraries. Libraries
Don't
make
get
me
too
happy.
used to it.
Libraries make me happy.
Yeah.
Seriously, like when I have time to go to the library or go to a bookstore.
What's your favorite library? New
and
York
just
Public
wander.
Library, or where?
Yeah,
that's
the
a great.
Mid-Manhattan Library.
Yeah.
It's the ugliest building in the world, but I just feel so happy there for two reasons. One is the picture collection, which I'm sure you know about.
Yeah. Which is
And
great.
I just feel like I feel like it is an endangered place. Like
It
is
is.
not going to, Google Images has essentially supplanted it for many people. But I feel like it's this analog brain,
Well, and the trouble, and I love Google Images, and I think it's
Sure,
a great
I do
thing.
too. Yeah.
But it's not the same as the serendipitous discoveries you make
Yeah.
in a physical world, going through boxes and doing. I mean, it just is. Maybe it's the sense of ceremony, maybe it's the circumstance, but I always find a different type of unexpected output than I get from online.
Yes.
And the fact that it's intrinsically inefficient is one of its strengths.
Yes, exactly. Like often I will go, they have these accordion folders with categories and you're looking up, the Atlantic Ocean or something, and and everything in that file is supposed to be a picture of that. But suddenly I have a page that's been torn out of the book, and I look on the reverse side.
Exactly.
And there's this amazing thing that makes me think of.
That's what, to me, it's that serendipity. It's just like, it's not what you were looking for.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have known to look for it, but there it
Exactly.
is.
Yeah. And the same with kind of perusing the bookshelf. You get the call number and you go to the shelf and there's your book, but then there are these other books that are next to it. And I do think that the specificity of, Google image search, of course you get other random things too, but.
And it's clearly amazing,
Yeah.
but it's different.
It's different. Yeah. So I love the serendipity of that, that archaic system. And secondly, I like the people. I feel like I see the city there. Mm-hmm. It's like a real cross-section of the city. And that kind of fuels me.
Yeah, and also librarians are very interesting
Yes.
people where, it's sort of...
So true.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And This is why, with the quote unquote modern world as defined by whatever you're not used to
Yeah.
as something new, on one level, they're gifts which give you remarkable access. I mean, you can search the world in an instant, which is amazing. But there's also a sense of loss, whereas you're giving something up. It's a little like in photography. Is it the zone system, minor white? Is it about pre-visualizing the image you want to see, and then how do you achieve that?
Yeah.
Or is it about discovery, meaning something will emerge as I'm shooting it? In digital photography, where you're looking at every frame when you take it, it's different than when you had to develop it.
Yeah.
And it's different than when you were looking through a twin lens reflex or a view camera. And a view camera, you're not looking at the scene at the moment you're taking the photograph. Just the film is replacing your viewer.
Right.
And I found that structure and discipline, not to mention it's $100 every time you take a shot.
Right.
So you're shooting 8x10 film, it's $25 for a sheet of film plus processing it. You have to scan it, you have to do all of that. So every time you do that, you couldn't look through it. If you made a mistake in exposure or something else, you're not going to find out until you're returned from the Grand Canyon 2 weeks later and to process the film.
Yeah.
And that sense of discipline, ritual, other things was valuable.
Yeah.
On some levels, it's frustrating. I remember, because again, I was shooting these big exterior fine art scenes that, I'm in a hotel room. I found some miserable little closet with roaches in it, have gaffer taped myself into the closet to seal the light off so I can load these sheet film holders.
Right.
And, and when you're loading 8x10, it's one thing, 11x14, you're loading 20x24 film holders, it's actually quite the thing.
Yeah.
And of course, there's no air, and so you're dripping in sweat. And if you get sweaty fingerprints on the film, it leaves your fingerprint on the film. And so can you work with white cotton gloves while you're in this, but then you can't really fill the film, so you drop a sheet of the film in the middle. So it just, on one level you say, well, these were not the most fun moments in the world. But when I look at an image, which is an image I like after having gone through all of that, that rite of passage, just like the rite of passage of discovery when you're researching something, it adds a certain level of importance and accomplishment to it, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can remember just hours of just kind of walking through the stacks of the library kind of aimlessly, and then finally coming upon the thing that feels right. And
there's something about being surrounded by all of this and then zeroing in on it, which is different than doing a search. It's
yeah.
No,
Completely.
you're absolutely right. So what's the next big thing for you? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, I mean, a couple of the things that
when I say big, I mean back to biology, or you're going to become a car racer or a deep sea diver, or are we going to stay in theater for a while? What's your sense?
I think we're going to stay in theater for a while, but also making forays into other avenues. Like something I've been interested in doing for a while is like public art, and seeing what it's like to not work with collaborators so much, and to work in a purely formal medium, in a plastic medium, which is something that I find that sometimes I feel like my set designs, I feel like sometimes my weakness is a kind of fluidity through a time-based process. I think that sometimes my sets are somewhat monolithic or static in some way. So I know that my tendency is to do that. So I'm like, oh, well, why don't I actually try working with that in a medium that embraces that? So public art, or, going back to my cemetery undergrad thesis, I would love to design a memorial someday. Someone that I was inspired by a lot as a young student was Maya Lien.
I was just about to ask about Maya, obviously.
Yeah, so her body of work, where she's gone from architecture, but, working in the fine art world, is definitely something that I feel inspired by. So I'm,
See, one of those elusive role models,
yeah, exactly.
the unspeakable role models.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and taking time to chat.
Thank
It
you.
was a lot of fun learning more about you, and hope
Yeah.
this will be the first of many more conversations to come.
I hope so too.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And that is a cut.